Well, it's good to be with you on our first Sunday of a new year. So thank you for starting your new year at the Grove. And yeah, we can applaud that. It's going to be a good year here. And so I thought it'd be fitting because we're turning a page, kind of starting a new chapter in the story of the Grove. And so I thought it'd be fitting to do a series on some of the things we value most. There's words that we use at the Grove to kind of talk about our uniqueness and our passions. And so I'm starting this series that we're titling Our DNA, Our Driving Passions at the Grove. And this morning I want to start with the word authenticity. I think there's several words over the next month that we'll look at. One is authenticity. Another one is creative, that we are creatives and we promote creativity here. Another one is that we are a missional church and we value justice. And then a fourth one would be that we use this language. We are a participatory church. We want people to come and participate. But today I want to start with just this one single word, this idea of being authentic. It's something that Jesus talked about often, and it was central to his heart, and he was passionate about it. So open your Bibles to Luke chapter 18. And as you're turning there, let me just ask you, this is a rhetorical question, so do not raise your hand. Did you have any Christmas fails this year? Have you ever at Christmas given a gift and it just blew up? It was the wrong message for the wrong person at the wrong time. I had a moment like that years ago, and my wife and I had moved across the Atlantic Ocean, and Christmas was coming, and I needed to buy her a gift. And so I went to the market of all places. That was the only place. We're in this small African town. And I'm shopping in the market, and I'm thinking, what can I possibly buy her? And then I see a guy with a tray, and they walk around with trays full of stuff they're selling, and he has chiclets, chewing gum, Marlboro cigarettes, and Rolex watches right there on the same tray. I'm not kidding you. And I was like, bingo. So I said, Rolex watches. I said, is it real? He said, yes. And I said, well, how much is it? He said, $25. Now, some of you are thinking, well, Palmer, why would you buy a counterfeit? You shouldn't encourage that. And I would just ask you back, well, who am I to judge? Who are you to judge? Maybe the Swiss franc was really off that year and it was $25. You don't know that he was the West African distributor for all of Rolex. You don't know that. He's only 16, but you don't know. So I buy the watch and I'm thinking, this is an awesome Christmas gift in the middle of the jungle. And so I wrap it up and I put it under our tree. And she opens it Christmas morning. And I don't know if it was the feather weight of the watch that made her know it was a fake. I don't know if it was that the second hand was ticking. Rolexes have perpetual motion. Maybe she knew that. But whatever it was, she threw it across the room and she yelled, it's a fake. And she wouldn't even put it on. And I was hurt because I'd spent so much on it. And it meant so much to me. But isn't it true? None of us want to have something that's a fake. None of us want to be known as fakes. None of us want to spend time with people who are fakes. We value authenticity. We don't talk about it much, but it really is something that we value. Conversely, we want to be known as someone who's genuine and real. We want to spend time with people who are authentic, and we hope that it will rub off on us. Well, Jesus, at a number of times, he stops in the Gospels to talk about how important authenticity is to him. And so you have to look at Luke 18. We're going to end up in Luke chapter 7, but I want to begin with this interaction that Jesus has. So listen to this, verse 9. To some who are confident of their own righteousness and look down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. So you have to stop and just let that sink in, because he's speaking to a bunch of fakes. That's what it's saying. And he's hitting them, getting right in their kitchen. Verse 9, 10. Two men went up from the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, the other was a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers and evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give a tenth of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance, and he would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his chest and he said, God, have mercy on me. I am a sinner. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified. So Jesus, we see, he values authenticity. We want to be authentic people, isn't that true? But what does it really mean to be authentic? It used to be that behavior psychologists did not write about this or even research the idea of authenticity. They thought it was too vague, too nebulous. You couldn't really define it. We kind of only define authenticity by what is inauthentic. But then recently, there's been this recent grasp on the word authenticity, and human psychologists, behavior psychologists, are starting to realize it's core to who we are. And it was central to when Jesus described a follower of God that they needed to be authentic. The problem is that so often in this life, we're pressured, aren't we, into being someone that we're not. It could be by a parent, and they don't even know they're doing it. It could be by friends or peers. They pressure us into acting like someone we're not. It could be even someone you love, like a husband or a wife, makes you feel like you need to be someone who you're not. And then we end up living inauthentic lives, or fake. We are only performing for people. It's kind of like a reality show, TV show that got canceled this last year. I haven't seen the show, I just read about it when it was canceled, but this reality show was canceled, they said, because everyone on the show was a fake. Now, what reality show isn't filled with fakes? But they canceled this one because it's filled with fakes. It goes something like this, true story. So there's a fashion designer in Georgia, and he owns this opulent mansion, 9 bedrooms. He buys each of his kids, 4 kids, these luxury cars that they drive around. And he says, my kids, they spend $300,000 a year on shopping. And he brags about his opulence and his wealth. And that's what's on the show every time it's shown. But then early last year, he files for bankruptcy. He was $42 million in debt, and he had to file for bankruptcy, and he ended up living in an apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Atlanta. And here's what it's sad. It's sad. Here's what one of his sons said. He said, our family's fairy tale existence is a sham. He says, the show has ruined us. The show is a fake. Wow, and none of us would want to live that way. But if we're honest about it, if you think about it with me, so much of our time is spent, especially in social media. So many of us here spend a lot of our time curating our photos so that we only post the best ones of us. We have this secret competition going with friends to be better looking online and to be more interesting. And so before we post on Instagram or Pinterest for women only, if you post on those, you want to make sure you put the best of you. Paul Gunther on our staff, he says, if you really want to know what someone is like and what they look like, he said, you look at the pictures that other people tag them in. And they're on your pages, and you look miserable. All of us do. And you go and you delete the pictures, then you delete the friends who posted them because you don't want any part of that. But it's an exhausting thing, isn't it, living an edited life? That kind of digitally edited life, it can't be sustained, can it? And the problem though is that this kind of inauthenticity creeps into churches and it can creep into the lives of Christians. And that's why Jesus kept coming back to this idea that he calls us to be authentic. When Jesus talked about those who were inauthentic, fakes of his day, he always seemed to focus his attention on the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And you have to turn to Matthew, turn back a few pages in your Bible. And in Matthew chapter 23, there's a whole chapter where he talks to the Pharisees. And I'll tell you who they are if you don't know much about them in just a minute, but they were the fakes of his day. And he says this, verse 13, I won't read the whole chapter. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You hypocrites, you clean the outside of the cup and the dish. This is verse 25. But inside you're full of greed and self-indulgence. Verse 27. You are beautiful like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside you're full of bones of the dead and everything unclean. In the same way on the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. And so he gets completely honest, harshly honest with them. Now, a Pharisee, the word Pharisee means set apart. They were the set apart ones. They dressed like that. They wore this turban that was pointed and white. They wore these elaborate gowns with huge embroidered down the side. They had golden tassels. They had these blue and white prayer shawls. People saw them coming from a mile away. And they carried this show with them. The problem is people feared them. Nobody wanted to be near the Pharisee or the Sadducee because they were the enforcers of the code in the Torah, and they would have you whipped or flogged or punished if you weren't dressed right or living right. Nobody wanted to be near the Pharisees. But Jesus was tired of that kind of person. And when you read the Bible, you quickly realize that God and his son Jesus keep talking about this way to follow God with your true self, with your authentic self. Not someone you're pretending to be, but someone who is real. Shows, Jesus says in so many words, are for the spiritually shallow. He says that the Pharisees are like bright plastic on the outside, but on the inside, they're empty. And it was the religiously raw who really did capture Jesus' attention and made him want to pay attention to those. So authenticity, I said, was important to Jesus. Here's what's interesting today is that authenticity is important to this next generation. I don't know if you've noticed that or realized that, but the millennials value authenticity, and we can learn from that. I was speaking at a publishers conference in Atlanta this last summer, and I was asked to serve on a panel with Brad Lomenick. Maybe you don't know who Brad Lomenick is, but for 10 years, the last 10 years, he's been the CEO and president of the Catalyst Conference, which is an emerging conference to young pastors and young Christians. And so the seminar was on why are millennials leaving the church? And so Brad was asked this question. He was asked, Brad, what do millennials want most in their churches? Why are they leaving? What do they want most? And his answer was simple, and it came out right away. He said they want authenticity. He said they don't want to show, they don't want to be manipulated, they don't want to be sold something. They just want a church and Christians that are real and people that are genuine. And so that has become, that has always hopefully been part of our pursuit here at the Grove. But this next generation has practically a near obsession with authenticity. I brought some show and tell items for you this morning just so you can, maybe if you've missed these trends, you'll understand what I'm saying. For example, this manual typewriter came off the desk of one of our millennial interns. She was reading earlier, and she has a manual typewriter, but they like manual typewriters because their technology's simple. They drink out of mason jars because it's a way to reject commercialism and consumerism, plus it repurposes something that would be thrown away. They wear bow ties and they wear mustaches and they wear thrift shop vintage clothes because they're vintage. They've made vinyl albums cool again. Okay, so they not only listen to obscure indie music because it's obscure, but they also are playing vinyl records, which is awesome because I grew up on vinyls and I've kept all of my vinyls, and my wife this Christmas gave me a record player, and my kids hate it, but I've been playing Stevie Wonder. Here's a few of my favorite I brought to show you. Stevie Wonder, you needed that. These are all my albums from the 70s. Kool and the Gang. You cannot have a party without Kool and the Gang. Another one I have here is Air Supply. Now, here's the thing. Part of being authentic is to be vulnerable and transparent. This is why I need counseling. And my first concert ever was Air Supply. And then I brought my all-time favorite, Saturday Night Fever, all the music. Talk to me about that. We're not kidding around anymore. And I tell my sons, all the best music of one whole century is on this one album, and they don't agree. But the millennials, they value things that are vintage and old from decades past because they say they're less corrupted by consumerism and commercialism, and they're more reliable. And so I brought like a fixie bike, and they ride fixie bikes because they don't have any gears. It's just one gear. I own this fixie bike kind of by mistake. We were in San Diego a summer ago, and my son said, hey, everybody else on the beach is riding bikes. We need bikes, Dad. So we went down to Sports Authority, and this was on sale for $65. I said, give me 2. And so I bought it. I didn't know what it was, but I'm riding it, and all these 20-year-olds are saying, dude, awesome, sweet bike. And I'm going, right on. And so I didn't know. They didn't know I was cheap, and I didn't know my bike was awesome, but now I think it is. But they value all of these things that are austere, and I have this thought here because it'll help us understand where we're going this morning. I have this sentence in your handout. Let's put it on the screen. Help me out. I didn't memorize it. Though difficult to define, the contemporary concept of authenticity is based primarily on 2 things. One, that which is vintage, and the idea of austerity. So vintage is important to authenticity because vintage, the idea of it reaches back. And that fits so well with our Christian faith because when we sing a song like Amazing Grace and we hear the story that it's over almost 200 years old or over 200 years old, we know that our faith goes back. When we pray, when Josh leads us in praying the Nicene prayer, we realize that there's something very vintage and authentic and ancient and good about our faith. It's not something recent, but it has a story that goes with it. So vintage is important to the idea of authenticity. There's even a pastor in Santa Cruz. I've talked to him at the Catalyst Conference. His name is Dan Kimball. And Dan pastors a church that he named Vintage Faith. What a great name for his church. He said because he's reaching this next generation, many of his people come from UC Santa Cruz. And he says, and he's written in a book on worship the things that they value at his church. For example, he says they love liturgy because it's so unpretentious and it reaches back and reminds us of our history. He says in his church, he said, when the millennials started to come to Vintage Faith, they said, Dan, the band disappears behind a curtain. And when they disappear behind the curtain after they play, it feels like a show. It feels like a performance. And so they've gotten rid of the curtain. And I thought when we built this place, is it possible to have a space without a curtain? And so that's just some of our values have come from that idea. But the idea of austerity also is closely tied to authenticity because austerity communicates the concept of frugality or simplicity. And the idea is that the more simple something is, the more authentic it is. I think, and Jesus kept reminding us of the need for us to follow him and follow God alone. At the Grove, this idea of austerity is something that we've grabbed onto. We tried to communicate it even through the construction of this building. A month ago, I talked about some of those ideas. But when you look at like our finished surfaces, a lot of our finished surfaces are just the raw materials like polished concrete or reclaimed wood or rusting metal. It's why we've tried to be tech simple in here, and we have natural light leaking into the room. So we're talking about this idea of authenticity, and really, so as we think about it, what does it mean to be an authentic person? We all agree that to be inauthentic, to be fake, is not a good thing, but what does it mean to actually be authentic? Well, Jesus helps us understand it, so I need you to turn to Luke chapter 7, and I want to talk about some qualities out of this passage we see. And I've made a list of 7 qualities of people who are authentic and genuine. And so we read this in Luke chapter 7. And again, Jesus is interacting with a Pharisee, and we see him contrasted with a person, a woman who is genuine and authentic. Verse 36. When one of the Pharisees, his name is Simon actually, invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at a table. A woman in that town who had lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. And as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her hair and with her tears. And she wiped them with her hair and kissed them and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. And Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. And you have to move down to verse 47 to see his last statement. He says this, her many sins have been forgiven. So as I start this list of qualities of authentic people, I'll start with this. The first one is authentic people, they stop pretending. They quit pretending to be someone they're not. When you crawl into a lunch party, when you crash a party and you fall on your knees at someone's feet and you start washing them, you've quit pretending you have your act all together, haven't you? You quit pretending that that everything's perfect in your life. Authentic people have learned to do that, and they stop pretending. The thing is, we often disguise our true personality so that others don't judge us. When I worry about what others think of me, then I end up pretending to be someone who I'm not, to avoid their disapproval or to seek their approval. If I'm authentic, though, on the other hand, then I can be confident in who I am. I can stop fearing rejection. I can stop being afraid of being caught and found out. Authentic people tend to have self-esteem because they're confident in who they are. They stop pretending. One of the most freeing things that can happen to us is to stop pretending that you're someone that you're not and to just live as a person God made you to be. A second quality that I have on the screen here is that authentic people live their lives filled with purpose. So when we look at this woman who falls at Jesus' feet, most commentators, most theologians who write about this passage would say that she was selling her body for a living. And I think at this moment in time, she hears that there's someone in town, the Son of God, who can forgive her sins. And she knows in a moment that she's done living this kind of life. And so she realizes there's something new for her. And so she falls at Jesus' feet and says, forgive me. And he does. And she starts to live a new way. I think there's a basic question that every human being who's ever walked on planet Earth asks over and over and over. And it's this: what am I here for? If you're a follower of God, you're asking, why has God put me here on this earth? I think it's the most basic question all of us are asking. Unfortunately, I've also read recently that 80% of Americans do a job every day that they don't love doing. And that, now, I'm sure you here represent the 20% that absolutely love your job and you love getting up in the morning, but 80% of Americans get up every day and don't love the work that they do. And then as I read on, they said they would ask people, researchers would ask people, why are you doing this job? And they would say, well, someone told me I should. You know, maybe a parent or a professor or a teacher. Or is the only person that accepted the only place that accepted their application. And I would challenge you to start to live a life full of godly purpose, even if it means choosing a new career maybe. Don't quit your job till you have a new one, just some life advice. Veronica and I used to live in California, and there was this sweet, godly woman who was at our church that we knew quite well. Her name was Bertha. Bertha was an immigrant from another country, and her kids were in our youth group, and so we knew her family well. Bertha worked as a housekeeper. But then after I left California, her kids got older and married and started to have their own kids, and one moved out of state and one moved far out of town. And Bertha said, I hardly saw them anymore, so I got a new job. She said instead of cleaning houses, now she works in a castle. That's what she'll tell you. And she started work down the street in a place that builds castles. And it's called the happiest place on earth. And she said, now my grandkids want to come visit me every weekend. And their parents can't keep them away. You know, we want to see grandma. She says, and my friends and family, that would include my family. She said, family shows up, and I didn't even know I was related to them. And they want to go in because I have these free passes. But when you see her in her workplace, you know that she couldn't be in a better spot to work because she's so full of energy and she has this infectious smile. You see, the trouble is, all of us do this. You settle for a life that you didn't plan on. You see, there's a version of you that you never wanted to be. There's a version of you that is not the best you. But then there's a version of you that you know God made you to be. And every once in a while, we get a glimpse of it. And if there's anything I could challenge you this morning, it's to say, God, I'm ready to live this life for you that's full of godly purpose. And I hope to point you in that direction today. Authentic people, I'll say next, seize the moment. So we have this woman who hears from across town that there's someone in town that can forgive her of her life, we read, of many sins. And so she drops everything and she heads that way and she seizes the moment. And I want to say, maybe it's time for you to do that. Maybe it's time for you to grab onto a new job or a new career. Maybe it's time for you to get on a plane or start your own business, or better, start your own nonprofit. It's time for your soul to wake up. There's a lot of people, even Christians, who live mainly in the past or they live in the future. Have you ever talked to people who keep talking about how great life was 10 years ago or back then? You feel like you're talking to Napoleon Dynamite's Uncle Rico, right? All they need is a velour shirt and the hair parted down the middle and the creepy mustache. But there's some people that act like in the past it was so much better. There's some people that keep talking about, well, life will be better when? Maybe next year or next month when they do this or finish that, or when the kids graduate from high school or from college. And I just want to say, no, in the Bible, we keep reading about the moment is now. David kept writing words and lyrics to songs and poems. He wrote this, for example. This is King David in the Psalms writes, "This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in this day," today. Jesus used to talk about this. He said, God, give us today the bread that we need for today. I have next, as the next quality of authentic people stop playing it safe. So she crawls in on her knees. She crashes a luncheon. She's definitely stopped playing it safe. I think a lot of us end up living the lives we do because we keep playing it safe. There's only two reasons we don't do things in life that we feel they're impossible. One, we don't believe we can do it. And two, other people tell us we can't do it. There's a famous American entrepreneur by the name of Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn says, you are the average of your 5 closest friends, the people closest to you. You are the average of those 5 closest to you. And if your 5 closest friends are 5 monkeys, then you're going to end up acting like that. If your 5 closest friends, though, are creative and take initiative and they're self-starters and they're motivated, then you will be the same way. So be very careful who your friends are. Stop playing it safe. You know, there's a lot of things that you've dreamed of doing, but you haven't done because it feels impossible. But I want you to think about this with me. Everything feels impossible until someone does it, doesn't it? Isn't that true? You think about the 4-minute mile. For decades and decades, everyone in the track business said it was physically impossible for a human being to run a sub 4-minute mile. That was until 1954, May 6th, when Roger Bannister rounded the track and the announcer came on the microphone and he says, Roger Bannister has just run a 3, and that's all he could get out. And the crowd went nuts and no one heard him say 3 minutes and 59.4 seconds. Nobody thought it could be done. Better than that, over the next 2 months, just 2 months, because Roger had done it, 16 more people ran a sub 4-minute mile. Until someone does it, everything feels impossible. And so my invitation to you is to stop playing it safe and stop listening to the critics who tell you you can't do it. I have next, authentic people live generously. Look at verse 37 with me. We read, she brought, this is Luke chapter 7, a beautiful alabaster jar filled with expensive perfume. She kept kissing his feet and pouring the perfume on him. So some say, we read later that it's a rare jar of perfume. Some say that it took a year's wages maybe to buy this perfume. It was so rare. But she doesn't care, because you know what? Authentic people value others more than things. They value experiences more than things. They value friends more than things. They even value their church more than things that they own. I tell you why I say that, because years ago when we bought this land, we sit on 20 acres. When we started to buy it, we obviously needed some money. There was only like 100 people at the Grove, and that's counting every child and baby in the nursery and the pregnant mothers. We counted twice. That's everybody, okay? Like 100 people, and we needed to buy this. And so we knew people would have to make sacrifices. And one family came in my office when we were trying to raise the money for this land, and they handed me a check, and I said, wow, that's a lot of money. It was $5,000. And I was surprised that they could afford it. I said, thank you. How can you do this? They said, well, the truth is we bought a house about a year ago. And they said when we moved in, we started to save up money to put furniture in our living room. And we saved up $5,000, but we realized when you told us what the need was that we already have furniture in the family room. We don't need furniture in the living room as well. And so we're giving you the check instead. And they decided they would live a little more simply so they could be more generous. The only problem is every time over the next 2 years, I'd go to their house for like a football game or a barbecue, and I'd walk through this empty living room, no furniture for years, maybe 3 or 4 years. And it felt terrible, but I loved that statement and that way of life. And I would simply encourage you that to remember that authentic people tend to live simply and live generously. Move down to verse 44 with me in Luke 7, because listen to what Jesus says to this Pharisee, because he was everything but generous. And Jesus says to him, he gets right in his grill, verse 44, I entered your home. You didn't even offer to wash the dust from my feet, but she washed them with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You didn't greet me with a kiss, but from the time I first came in, she has not stopped kissing my feet. You neglected the courtesy of olive oil to anoint my head, but she has anointed my feet with perfume. Do you see the contrast between the authentic woman and the inauthentic man, between the generous and the stingy? I'll end with 2 last thoughts and 2 simple thoughts. Authentic people are not judgmental. You read about the man we read first in Luke 18 who's just beating his chest while the other man judges him. Authentic people do not judge others. At the Grove, we don't act like everyone here has it all together. And then the last one I have here is that authentic people are gracious. I hope that this place, we've always hoped that this place, it becomes a home for people who are gracious to each other, where we are authentic enough to not hide what's not right in our life, what's not perfect, and then at the same time, we don't have a place, and you see this in other churches where people are judgmental and lack that quality of being gracious to those around them. I hope you experience that as you come into the Grove. So as we talk about our DNA, as we talk about what's important to us, I want to start with this word of living as authentic followers of Jesus Christ.